Hey everyone, Steve here. So it seems like it's some sort of obligation that every artist and musician out there needs to have a public stance on AI. And since everyone I know, and especially the musicians in my life, won't stop asking me about it, I decided that it was maybe time for me to make a video and share what I know and try to explain why me as a musician and artist, I'm not really worried about AI at all. Now, I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can, mostly because I'm sure everyone out there is as sick as I am of hearing and talking about AI. However, I can say that after hearing tons of opinions over the last couple years from both AI defenders and critics, I do feel like a few things have either been left out or maybe missed in the overall discussion of what AI means to the music industry and to artists in general. So right off the bat, if I had to describe my personal feelings on AI in a single sentence, I would say it is fascinating on the surface, but mostly it's stupid and sucks. And that's pretty much it. Although I am going to try to expand a bit on why I think that, and more importantly, why I think AI might have a future in the music industry, just maybe not one that most people think, at least if you've been following all of the discourse online. So after hearing me say all that, you might conclude that I'm a bit of an AI hater, and I don't think that's true. I really don't have any problem with the technology behind AI. I take issue mostly with the way it's being sold or hyped up to us. And I should probably confess I might know a little bit more about this than maybe your average musician or member of the general public. And I'm not saying that to brag or anything. I just have read a lot about it, and it's something I've always found really interesting and wanted to learn more about. In fact, here I have a book called The Society of Mind by Marvin Minsky, which is something my dad gave me to read when I was pretty young. He's big into technology and computing as well. This is a book on artificial intelligence from 1985. And in it, Minsky's central premise is that you can basically build something very complex, like a mind or an intelligence, from many smaller pieces that themselves don't have a mind, something that he calls agents. I'm not going to talk too much about this book since it's a pretty harmless exploration of the nature of intelligence and what it might look like in an intelligent machine or a computer. And it's actually really fascinating. I would recommend most people read it. It's this book here that's a big culprit in the so-called AI revolution that we're always hearing about these days. This is The Singularity is Near by Ray Kurzweil. You may have heard of Kurzweil pianos, and it's that same guy. This book was given to me by a close friend, and it's actually really fascinating and contains some really cool insights on technology and the nature of information and intelligence. Kurzweil is a really smart guy, and even though some of the book gets a bit heavy philosophically and mathematically, I would still recommend it to anyone with even a passing interest in technology and the future of technology specifically. Now, why am I bringing up these two books, you might ask? Well, in my opinion, Minsky's book, Society of Mind, broadly represents the practical reality of artificial intelligence. So stuff like physically on a machine level, what would intelligence look like and how could we maybe build it? Kurzweil's book, on the other hand, represents more the hype or the more philosophical ideas around AI and the ongoing advancement of technology. Now, before you type an angry comment, I know that Kurzweil's book is about more than that, but my point is you could broadly describe Society of Mind as here are some neat thought experiments on what intelligence might actually be and how humans maybe could build it in the future. And the Singularity says technology will eventually evolve and will create God. Now, I'm overgeneralizing here, of course, but my point is that if you've been paying attention to any of the discourse around AI recently, I can almost guarantee you've heard way more about that second thing, the let's create God thing, and way less about that first thing, like what is intelligence really? How do we define it? Is it even possible to create? And do you want to take a guess which one of those two books is more popular with the Silicon Valley and tech CEO crowd? And this, in my opinion, is best illustrated by this chart in Kurzweil's book, which I'll put up on screen right here. And I'm going to admit, when I first read this book a few years after it came out in maybe 2009, 2010 or something like that, I was really intrigued by this chart specifically. And without laboring over all the math here, basically it shows what Kurzweil calls the key milestones of both biological evolution and human technological development plotted out over time. Now, this version of the chart is logarithmic, so it's probably easier to visualize what he's getting at by looking at this chart, which is also from his book. And Kurzweil's point here is basically for a long time after life began, nothing much happened. And then all of a sudden, as soon as humans showed up, things started happening really quickly. Or in other words, technological progress is accelerating over time. And Kurzweil loves this kind of chart. Variations of it show up all over the place in his book. And you'll also see it online everywhere if you go looking as well. This image is basically his way of saying that if technological trends continue the way they have been over history, then we should be creating some kind of advanced, hyper-intelligent universe filled with self-replicating information eventually. Now you'll notice I said if trends continue this way, and after having sat with this idea for many years, I'm now of the opinion that the entire tech sector has been riding on this idea being an immutable fact for the past 2 decades or so. So much so that they've not only convinced a lot of us, but also themselves that this is true and all but inevitable at some point. Now I should also be clear that Kurzweil isn't the only writer or philosopher saying this kind of stuff. Another big name in the same space is a guy named Nick Land, and I'll have links to all these people and books in the description below, by the way. There are other groups out there too that you might want to know about. One of them is the EAC people, which is just a terrible abbreviation that stands for Effective Accelerationism. And in a nutshell, these guys are big believers that technology and specifically AI is going to solve all of humanity's problems, and we should help hurry this process up by not impeding its growth at all. I'm not going to go into too much detail on this movement at the moment, but I did want to point out that one of their logos is this image here, which I'm sure you can tell looks pretty similar to what we were showing before. The real question we should ask though is, has any of this panned out in reality so far? Kurzweil's book came out in 2005, and while the world does look a lot different than it did back then, is it on this same scale as the chart in his book? Or put another way, is the AI we have now the same AI that people like Kurzweil were promising us was just around the corner? So today, for the most part, the AI that we do have is largely promoted to us as mostly a consumer good. There are other applications, of course, like in manufacturing and the military and medicine as well. But usually when you hear about AI, especially in the music industry, you hear that it's going to make everything easy for you and it's going to make you more productive or maybe replace this job or that job, something like that. The problem is, this isn't the first time I've heard these same promotional incantations in my lifetime. And to prove it, I want you to watch this clip.
Together we have a chance to create something really special. Something that will change the lives of the entire future of human race. It's going to be that impactful. It really is.
So this clip is from 2015 and features the CEO of Oculus at the time talking about the future of VR headsets. And I can actually remember this, a time where all the big tech companies were selling this idea that everyone was going to be using VR for work and play and whatever else. They even wanted us to wear these things out in public, which just seems hilarious to me now. But there was a time where people thought this was legitimately going to be the future of work and social life for everybody. And actually a precursor to the whole VR hype was a few years before with the whole Google Glass thing. Google actually managed to convince millions of people that we'd all be wearing these things out in public, taking pictures of people without their permission and talking to ourselves, giving out personal information to anyone in earshot, something that's just wild to think about now. Now, from the perspective of the music industry, what was promised to us in this bright new future was fully immersive 3D concerts. No need to go out to actual music venues anymore with all those annoying other humans. But instead, what we ended up with was something more like this.
To find myself again, my walls are closing in. So insecure.
And I don't want to offend anyone involved in any of these examples that I'm showing, but this video really represents a bland, watered-down version of what should be an amazing personal experience. And even back then, I can remember not being impressed at all. But needless to say, neither of these two technologies took off as promised. And we've really seen two different things here. There was the hype behind the tech, if you remember Kurzweil's book. And then there was the much more mundane reality of the tech, something maybe more in line with Minsky's book here. I think it would be interesting to compare the before and after of these kind of technologies, or put another way, compare the hype of what was promised to the ultimate reality of what we ended up with. So if we're talking about VR, the hype was that virtual reality was going to fundamentally change the entire human experience. Everything from business to social interactions, gaming, economics and politics, etc. Now, the reality of what VR ended up being is what I can best describe as a cool but ultimately niche technology reserved for a small crowd with the money and time to blow on it. And I've played some VR video games, and I honestly think they're pretty cool. The idea of exploring a game like Skyrim in VR or playing Star Trek Bridge Crew sounds really amazing to me. But in practice, after a half hour or so, my neck, back, and eyes start to hurt. And I usually just give up and go do something else because, and this is really important, the idea of a technology can often be way more attractive and powerful than the actual usefulness of the technology. And you know what? That makes perfect sense, really. Technology is sexy and cool, and we all want to be like Tony Stark or maybe whatever his DC counterpart would be. Around basically this exact same time, I also learned about another technological innovation called Bitcoin. I remember reading the Bitcoin white paper sometime in the early 2010s and thinking it was a neat idea, but that was about it. However, a little while later, cryptocurrency started to catch on, and then I started hearing people saying stuff like this.
We're going to talk about the most exciting, most interesting, and probably the most important technological innovation, no invention in computer science of the last 20 years. I'm here to talk about Bitcoin. This invention is truly revolutionary. And when we look back at these moments, we will see that this is a historic moment in the evolution of computer science, but also a social and political revolution in the making.
I'm sure a lot of you can remember all of this. People were investing their life savings into this new form of currency. Tech evangelists were planning on building self-sustaining libertarian societies, either in the middle of the desert or on cruise ships for some reason. I also started seeing a lot of what I would call fanaticism about the subject, which, to be honest, kind of rubbed me the wrong way.
Wall Street is fraud, America is fraud, the world is fraud, banks are fraud, central banks are fraud. We live in an era of fraud. It's all based on fraud, and they get a percentage of the fraud. That's the business model. Terrorists, jihadis of banking. They're here to kill you and themselves.
Janet Yellen's a terrorist. Mario Draghi's a terrorist. The Central Bank of Japan is a terrorist. These are the real terrorists.
For musicians, we were all promised that cryptocurrency and the blockchain were going to revolutionize the industry and essentially replace things like record labels and royalty payments.
I do believe that the blockchain will create an inevitable world where instead of record labels being your majority partner, your fans will become your minority partner.
And I don't need to rattle on too much about all the impracticalities of cryptocurrency. There are far better resources out there that could explain this way better than I ever could. And I will leave links in the description to a bunch of books and videos and podcasts on the topic that I would recommend. But essentially, as we mentioned with VR, we ended up with two different things here. We have what cryptocurrency was promised to be, which is something that would fundamentally change and revolutionize the way humans use money. And then what it actually turned out to be, which is a pretty cool but ultimately niche technology reserved for a small crowd with the money and time to blow on it. Maybe you're starting to see a bit of a pattern here. And I could go on too. Do you remember the Metaverse? Here's what was promised with that.
Everything we do online today, connecting socially, entertainment, games, work, is going to be more natural and vivid.
Really, it's an early look at the sort of intuitive, low-friction interface that AI plus EMG input will enable in the future. This is how we'll all be interacting one day.
Now, we all know that didn't end up happening, but don't forget, musicians were promised all kinds of wild things about virtual concerts inside the Metaverse and Decentraland and tokenized merchandise, stuff like that. But do you want to see what that actually ended up looking like? I don't know about you guys, but I think I'd rather go to karaoke. But once again, we were promised that the Metaverse was going to fundamentally change the entire human experience. But what did we end up with? Yeah, that again. What about NFTs? Do you remember those? Musicians were being promised things like this.
NFTs are the future of the music industry. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, but Damien, they look like they've been drawn by some homeschooled 5-year-old. I know that, but they are now selling for millions and they are set to disrupt the music industry.
This is how music NFTs will make you rich. Music NFTs are changing the music industry right now. They will allow you to invest in your favorite artists as if they were a cryptocurrency. An artist that sold their music as an NFT would give their fans the ability to purchase royalty rights, meaning the NFT holders would make passive income just off that music. Cool, isn't it? Imagine being able to invest in Michael Jackson's Thriller album before it sold 70 million copies, or to invest in Beyoncé before she won 28 Grammy Awards.
Now, putting aside the just absolute cringe I feel when listening to some of these people talk about this stuff, these kind of claims show an utter lack of knowledge not only about the music industry, but also about how intellectual property works. Like, saying you as a fan could have had a financial stake in Thriller is just a wildly stupid thing to say. It's almost as if none of these people have any knowledge or interest in actually learning about the industries they're trying to disrupt, and are just hoping they can hype their way into convincing everyone that all of this is just gonna happen. At this point, we basically know that with a few rare and probably sketchy exceptions, anyone who participated in the whole NFT thing got basically nothing substantial out of it. Or at the very least, yet again, it wasn't the amazing revolution that they were promising. There are so many more examples of new consumer tech that was promised to us that ended up being an overhyped, somehow worse version of something that humans can already do just fine. For example, I thought I actually dreamed this, but does anyone remember Amazon's Always Home flying camera thing that was supposed to revolutionize home security? This thing here that was promised to fly around your home all day, keeping an eye on things, except for when it came out, it could only fly for something like 5 minutes before it had to go back in charge for an hour and a half. Again, it's a neat little idea that made big promises, but in reality, since physics exists, it was never going to be what it was promised. I'm not even including some of the obvious scams that tried all these same tactics, like the whole Theranos thing or the decades-long promise of self-driving cars. I didn't want to compare AI to these types of failures, mostly because I don't think AI is a scam necessarily, but I do think it's an overhyped technology that is being sold to us with promises like this.
Something's missing. Hey Meta, I need more acidity. You got any ideas?
You typically use lemon.
You know what? It needs like a zhuzh of brightness.
Last time you used honey.
Honey? Yeah. Good, but it's not special. I need it to be special.
Light, airy textures can add a special feel.
Yes, I want it to feel as though I'm biting into a cloud.
Whipped cream can add an ethereal quality to your dish.
When in reality, it's more like this.
And other ingredients. How can I help?
Hey, can you help me make a Korean-inspired steak sauce for my steak sandwich here?
You can make a Korean-inspired steak sauce using soy sauce, sesame oil.
What do I do first? What do I do first?
You've already combined the base ingredients, so now grate a pear to add to the sauce.
What do I do first?
You've already combined the base ingredients, so now grate the pear and gently combine it with the base sauce.
All right, I think the Wi-Fi might be messed up. Sorry, back to you, Mark.
And to be clear, I'm not saying that AI will go the way of NFTs, but at this point, the tech industry is basically 0 for 0 when it comes to delivering on their promises with these huge tech revolutions. So I'm not holding my breath. Now, I do think there will be some AI tools that both musicians and non-musicians will use for various purposes in the music industry. But again, the most likely outcome of all this hype is that again. So if you were asking me if AI is going to replace musicians and composers and take over the world and put us all out of work, I mean, sure, I guess anything is possible, but let's be honest here. We're almost 3 years into this AI revolution, and all we're getting is still crappy artwork, terrible songs, and endless meme videos. Anything can happen for sure, but all I'm saying is we're this far in, and I've yet to see a convincing business model for any company using AI that is sustainable for the long term, meaning something that functions without the need to rely on hype to fuel continued venture capital investment. And I know that someone out there is going to say, well, the tech isn't there yet, but it's getting better, and once it is, et cetera, et cetera. But remember, I've heard that before too.
Well, there are different avenues. So the first thing is you could wear it on your real self through an AR filter. So that's number one. And that's the part where technology is still, work in progress. It's going to get better and better, we know it.
The problem as I see it isn't really AI replacing musicians at all. Instead, it's that we've allowed art and culture to stagnate so badly that a lot of human creative endeavors can be replaced by AI without most of us even noticing. Sure, modern AIs can easily create a boilerplate country song, but how many would be able to create a song like Bohemian Rhapsody, for example? Maybe in the future they'd be able to do that, but the point is AI can create country songs today because they've become so simple and formulaic, whereas Queen was unique and modern and weird, which is something that computers just can't understand. I think the solution to this comes down to the two things it always comes down to, which is education and media literacy. The best way to combat generic, stale AI music isn't to legislate or sue these companies out of existence, but instead to improve people's understanding of what makes the music they like worth listening to. And I see this every day in what I do. We've cut so much from musical education that people now don't even have the words to describe why they like a piece of music. They just accept it without question, which leaves the door wide open for AI music to replace human art. The media literacy thing is a big issue too. It's becoming harder and harder to separate fact from fiction since these tech CEOs, the same ones pushing AI, by the way, keep buying up all the news outlets that should be doing their job, reminding us about all the examples I just mentioned in this video. I'm a musician, not a journalist, and it really bugs me that I have to basically act like one sometimes for a lot of my clients and students and even some of the other musicians in my life, when there's supposed to be people out there in the more mainstream media who have this exact job. My advice for musicians and artists and even the general public is to take all of this AI hype with a huge grain of salt. But if you're worried about this kind of thing or you want to learn a bit more, my advice would be to do two things. Number one, learn more about the people and companies behind the endless line of tech hype cycles we seem to be caught up in the modern world. You'll start to see it's always the same groups of people saying the same things every single time. And again, I'll leave some links below in the description with some resources to help you do this. There are a ton of great books, documentaries, podcasts, and YouTubers out there who know way more about this stuff and who could explain it way better than I ever could. And I have personally read, watched, and listened to everything I'll be linking, so I can recommend it if you want to learn more about this kind of thing. And number two, and this one might seem a bit strange coming from me after everything I just said, but actually get out there and try some of these AI products for yourself and see how good you think they really are. Try and see what's really an AI-powered tool and what's just a normal algorithm or even outsourced labor passed off as an advanced AI. Some of the things out there actually do what they say they're going to do, and some might even be useful to you in some way. But I think you'll be surprised how many don't deliver on what they say they're going to do. I'm actually working on an article and a video about this right now, but more on that later. So anyways, if you made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I would love to hear what other people think about this, especially if you're a musician or an artist. So please do all the like and subscribe thing, and take care. I'll see you soon.